The following is a conversation with Reverend Dr. Alvin Sanders, President and CEO of World Impact, a visionary leader dedicated to transforming urban communities through redemptive poverty work. With decades of experience empowering urban leaders, Dr. Sanders has reshaped our views on poverty, leadership, and faith. This is Pre-Zero Sports Talk Podcast, and I'm your host, Sid Bensala. Today, we'll explore how redemptive work goes beyond charity to create lasting change. We'll uncover real stories, actionable insights, and the unexpected role of sport in leadership development. Let's dive in. Reverend Sanders, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Your leadership journey often tells us a lot about what drives you. Let's begin by exploring your personal story and how it has shaped your work at World Impact. Can you share your journey from childhood to leading World Impact?
Yes, so I grew up what's called a third culture kid, meaning that I experienced many different cultures in my growing up years. My father was in the Air Force for 30 years, and so I was born in Maine, but I spent a good portion of my childhood in Okinawa, Japan. And so I was told, it's gone, but I was told that I could speak fluent Japanese at one point in my life, but it's totally, completely gone now. But I've always been in different contexts throughout my life. Ended up settling in Columbus, Ohio, where I spent my middle and high school years and graduated there in an urban setting on the east side of Columbus. Always been a kid who was what's called a church kid. I was always in a church. Wherever we were at, I was in church somewhere. So pretty early on in my life, I made the choice to pick ministry as a vocation at the ripe old age of 21. So I'm 55 now, so you can do the math. So I've been in ministry for quite some time.
Yeah, indeed. What pivotal moments shaped your approach to leadership and service?
Well, I would say what I just described, the first thing is being a what's called in America a military brat. Growing up in a military culture, I think you get a lot of leadership lessons that you just sort of inherit. Like for instance, the discipline of being on time. In my father's house, 8 a.m. meant 7:45, right? So at 8 a.m., if he said be in the car at 8 a.m., if you weren't in the car by 8 a.m., you were getting left. That's just the way it was going to be. So I had discipline instilled in me from day one and high standards of this is the way things are supposed to go. This is the way things are supposed to be shaped and go, and as well as structure. And then I'd say that there was a pivotal thing that happened when I was at 21 in that I was in college and I was actually studying physical therapy. And I went off into a conference, and at this conference, they brought together a lot of Christian college students. It was in Atlanta, and we went out and we volunteered in the poor communities in Atlanta. So we went off into the poor communities in Atlanta, and while we were doing that, a pretty fabulous experience happened, and it was through that experience that I came to the conclusion that I wanted to do ministry in a community experiencing poverty. And that's when I switched and I transferred from Bowling Green State University to Cincinnati Christian University and finished my degree, and I've been in ministry ever since.
How did you first encounter the redemptive poverty work concept, and what drew you to it?
Well, redemptive poverty is something that I've sort of come up with over time because there's basically three frames in which we view the world. There's what I would call the exploitative mindset, where people look at situations and opportunities and they say, how can I exploit this for my own gain? And then there's the way of looking at it as an ethical mindset, and you can do things because it's ethically the right thing to do. And then there's redemptive. And I say that most of us, when we go into trying to help people who are in communities experiencing poverty, whether we know it or not, we go in as exploiters because we go in for our own purposes. We go in and try to get what we want out of it. And then there comes a point where we realize that, hey, you know what, if we're really going to make a difference in the lives and hearts of the people who are here, it has to go beyond our needs and our wants and our desires. And we want to really make their lives better, and we want the community to be a better place. And then we evolve sort of to what I call ethical poverty work, where it's a win-win situation where we want the people who we're helping to be contributors to their own success, and we want to be a resource to them to help them to reach that success. But then we also make a key critical change where we go from just viewing poverty work as short term, which we call charity, where, we just give you food or we give you clothing or whatever it may be, just temporary relief. Mm-hmm. When we get to ethical, we're looking more long term, and we want to make it a win-win situation. Now, as someone who has a Christian faith, I believe the Christian responsibility goes beyond ethical. It is redemptive. Yeah. And redemptive is making a life sacrifice so that regardless of what happens with the person or individual or the community that we're trying to help, it's creative restoration through that life sacrifice of what we want to do. And it's long-term in nature. And it's like, you know what? It is part of my Christian responsibility to help those who are experiencing poverty, to help also the neighborhoods that they live in. And so it's part of what we're charged to do as our Christian faith. So it goes beyond ethical. There's nothing wrong with ethical poverty work, but redemptive goes beyond ethical.
Yeah. Alvin, can you share a specific success story where this approach transformed a community?
Yes. So I'll go back into my own story where I used to serve as a pastor of a church in Cincinnati called River of Life Church. I planted my church in a neighborhood called Over the Rhine, which has some, being that you're based in Stockholm, this has some interesting European flavor. Over the Rhine, Cincinnati, first you need to know that Cincinnati is an old German town. Mm-hmm. A lot of the first immigrants that came to Cincinnati were from Germany. Okay. And there used to be this huge canal that ran through the city. And the first German immigrants would live in the apartments on top of that canal. And so people would say, where do you live? They had nicknamed the canal the Rhine River. And they would say, over the Rhine. So the name stuck. And that's because that's kind of a weird name for a neighborhood, right? Yeah. Over the Rhine. Well, that's why how it got that name. There was this canal. And the first immigrants used to say, we live over the Rhine. Over the Rhine, yeah. So, yes. So over the Rhine historically has been sort of the first step place where people who migrated to Cincinnati, they would establish themselves there. Then they would sort of experience social uplift once they got their finances together. Then they would move out. Mm-hmm. Well, over the years, it became a neighborhood that became very violent. In fact, when I started a church there called Church Planting in 2000, it was the second most violent neighborhood in the entire United States. So it was a neighborhood filled with violence. It was a neighborhood filled with crime. It was a neighborhood filled with folk who were good people, but they were just stuck in this vicious poverty loop. So I had the calling, the bright idea to start a church in that neighborhood for people who lived there as a long-term vision to say, you know what, we're going to invest in these folk and we're going to walk with these folk for the entirety of their lives. So we weren't going to just do a food pantry or anything of that nature, although we had those type of services. But our whole journey was, if you understand what a church truly is, a church is a place where people do life together. And so we were going to do life together with these folk. And that's why we started this church. It's called River of Life Church in Over the Rhine. And started in 2000. I'm no longer pastor there. Mm-hmm. I still do attend, but I haven't been pastor there since 2007. But I'm happy to report 25 years later, it's still serving the neighborhood. It's still serving the community. It has a food pantry, but it's much more than a food pantry. It's a place where people can come and they get to know each other. They pray for one another. They encourage one another. It still serves the neighborhood, but it's there for the long haul. And that's redemptive poverty work.
Fantastic.
It's a project that you do for the long haul, for the betterment of the people of the neighborhood and the community with their participation.
Wow. Nice. What are the biggest challenges in sustaining this kind of long-term work?
I think that it starts with, believe it or not, most Christians don't know that they have a responsibility for those who are in poverty. Mm-hmm. They don't really realize that the scriptures in the Bible teaches that we have to have, that is to be part of our lives. Mm-hmm. Somehow, some way, with our time, talent, and treasure, we are to invest in those who don't have enough. So the first big challenge and hurdle is just to make Christians aware of the fact that, yes, this is your responsibility as a Christian. And then the second biggest challenge then is, like all of us in this 21st century, we're just so stinking busy. We've got so many things happening and so many things coming out of us. And, I think spend entirely too much time at work, right? So you're working 60, 70 hours a week, and then you have a spouse, and then you have kids and soccer games. You got all this stuff competing for your time. So the only way that you will fulfill your Christian responsibility to help those who are in poverty is that you have to make time for it. You have to stop, you have to look at your schedule, and you have to say, okay, what is it that I'm going to do to contribute to the betterment of those in poverty so that society can be a better place? What am I going to do? Am I going to take an hour a week and tutor a child who's in the condition of experiencing poverty? Am I going to volunteer at a food pantry? Am I going to mentor someone? I mean, it's something. It doesn't really matter what it is, but you intentionally create time in your life and in your schedule so that you can invest in those who are experiencing poverty. So I would say those are the two biggest challenges. Really, if we could get most people, if you look at America and you look at all of the different churches and all the people who are part of congregations, if we could just mobilize people to just do those two things. Okay, one, I'm going to embrace my responsibility. And two, I'm going to create time in my schedule to do something to help those who are in poverty. That would make a massive difference.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Strong communities require strong leaders. Let's talk about how you identify and empower leaders in urban neighborhoods. What qualities make someone an effective community leader?
I believe leaders are made, not born.
Interesting.
I believe that. I believe that's when you look at the scriptures, okay, Jesus, if you look at the backgrounds of the 12 people that Jesus picked, you would say, why on earth would he draft those folk? Because these were not the top movers and shakers of society. These were the common man, so to speak. They were fishermen. One was even a zealot, Simon the Zealot, an activist. One was a tax cheat, right? I mean, if you look at the background, you go, these are just common everyday laborers or whoever it may be. And I believe that everybody has a propensity for leadership. Now, that's to be separated because we typically associate leadership with leaders who have a massive responsibility. Now, everybody's not wired to have massive responsibility, but everybody can play a role in being a leader. And so we look for people who, number one, have that willingness. They have a desire to want to make a difference in the neighborhood or in the community. Okay, so if you have a desire, well, then let's look at your talents and gifts. What do you have to bring to the table? And let's see if we can collide that with a need in the neighborhood. So if you have the desire and if you have the skill set, well, then let's collide that with a need. So for instance, when I was pastoring a church, there was a gentleman who used to play college basketball, right? And so he said he wanted to make a difference. Well, there was a need for a local basketball team to be started for kids who weren't skilled. Okay, if you're a skilled kid, nobody's gonna have a problem with you putting you on their team. But if you're a kid, you just love to play the game, you want to have fun, it's not cutthroat, it's not this, that, the other. You're not on your school team for whatever reason. There was a need for that. So he took his skill set of knowing how to play basketball. He gathered the kids and he taught them how to play basketball. So he's a community leader. It's that simple, right? You take your gifts and your talents that you have, you find a need in a neighborhood, you meet that need, and you make the neighborhood a better place.
I had the same topic asking my guest about leadership style. Are we born with it, or is it something that we can learn within time and things like that? And what you said is quite interesting, Alvin. Yeah, but still on that topic, let's say for the listeners, how do you define leadership?
Oh, that's a tough one. Let's see. Defining leadership? Simplest bare minimum requirements. A leader is someone who has people following them. How basic is that?
Yes.
So it's not the title, right? You could have the title, but if you look around and nobody's following you, guess what? Yeah. You're not a leader. So I would say the bare minimum requirement of a leader is I have people who follow me, right? So I'd say that's a leader. And so because I have people following me, I have the responsibility to lead them in a way in which will make the world a better place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good. Alvin, what inspired the collaboration with the Barna Group?
Well, Barna Group is known for, within Christian circles in America, as the top Christian research organization. And we were looking for quantitative evidence that what we were doing actually makes a difference in the world. So, we had a lot of qualitative evidence that we were making a difference in the world, but, it was like, can we find a third party who will come and study what we do, and then we could see whether or not we're making a difference. And if we're not making a difference, well, then we need to change the way we do things so that we can make a difference. But if we are making a difference, then we sort of have this objective third party who can document that. So that's what drew us to Barna, and because they're a top research organization. And then for them, they had done very little research in our context in urban ministry about what's going on and how churches are effective in that context. So it was a good match and a good marriage.
What key findings stood out to you as particularly significant within Barna Group?
Yes. There were several things. I would say maybe the most surprising finding, especially in 21st century America, is that if you're talking about an urban situation, and when I say urban, I'm talking about basically three things. I'm talking about people where there's diversity. There's a lot of diversity in every aspect. There's heavy density of people, and distance. And what I mean by distance is how they view time and space. So for instance, it's nothing for them to, like, if you live in Los Angeles, you just realize that there's going to be a lot of traffic and it's going to take you a long time to get anywhere, right? As opposed to if you live somewhere else. So all of those things, a sociologist will tell you, make a difference with your worldview of how you view things in the world. So people who live in these type of situations, in urban situations, the number one finding, in my opinion, was that people who don't go to church still wanted the church to be a part of their lives and the neighborhood. That I wasn't expecting to find that they still look at the church. They still have a high regard for the church, and they still want the church to be part of their lives and their neighborhood, in their community. And then so you say, well, okay, well, how so? Well, they want the church to make the neighborhood a better place. They may not agree with what's being taught or the theology and everything that's going on, but boy, if the church makes their neighborhood, their city a better place, they're all for it. And they want the church to enter in to spaces that make the city or the neighborhood a better place. Right? Yeah. So I would so we took the research and we did a tour last year, and I told the people who would attend when we would reveal the research, I said, listen, the number one thing your church can do in this space, according to this, is you can make the world a better place. And they specifically asked us to make the world a better place by doing one thing. They said, we're really, really lonely. We need a place to belong. We want a space to belong. So it's like if you took your building and if the pastor and the leaders of the church didn't say, we're only pastoring the people who come into this building, say, no, we pastor the entire neighborhood. And so how can we use this building to make people in the neighborhood be less lonely? And there was an old sociologist, I hope I get this correct, because he wrote this book a long time ago. His name was Ray Oldenburg, I think. And he talked about this concept of the third space. The third space, it's not home, it's not work, but it's the space in between. It's a communal space. His work was made famous by Starbucks because originally Starbucks used that as their business model, that they wanted to create third spaces for people. And oh, by the way, while you come to this third space, have some coffee, right? So if churches reimagine themselves as how can we use our buildings to be a third space for the neighborhood or for the community so that it can be a gathering place where people can be less lonely, our research says that's probably the best way you could help your neighborhood and your community.
Yeah. If you could change one policy based on these findings, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say if a local church went out and met its neighborhood, met the people in it, met its community, and found out what is it that this neighborhood doesn't have that we could provide, and then figure out what that is. And it's all going to vary depending upon the neighborhoods, right, that you're in. But if you found out what is it that this neighborhood needs that the church could provide, And then the church used its resources and its congregation to meet that need. I think if a church had that type of policy, it would be more effective, and it would bring to life this third space concept.
Let's shift gear and talk about something quite important, in my opinion, about dignity.
Yes.
Maintaining dignity is a cornerstone of effective poverty work. Why is it so important, Alvin, and how does it shape your approach?
Well, in America, in a capitalist society, you can argue something's good about capitalism, something's bad about capitalism, but at the end, but one of the bad things is your worth as a human being is tied to your material wealth. So as you're perceived in terms of how much money you may have, or what neighborhood you live in, or what car you drive, or what clothes you wear, this, that, the other, that's how people assign value to you. So obviously, if you don't have a whole lot of wealth, you sort of get the worst of everything. You get the worst city services, you get the worst schools, you're not looked upon as a contributor. And in fact, depending on some circles, you're seen as a drain on the neighborhood or a drain on society. And that's not a dignified approach. As from my Christian faith, I believe the scriptures, God says that every human being was made in God's image, and every human being has intrinsic worth just simply for the fact that they're human. And if you have intrinsic worth just because you're human, well, then that means we are to treat you in a dignified manner, regardless of how much money you have in your pocket, regardless of what social class you may have. I am not any better than somebody just because I'm in a particular social class and they're not. And that's something that has to be addressed. And people need to understand that just because someone may be in poverty, first off, we have a tendency to blame people. Well, you're in poverty, it's your fault. Well, no, most people are in poverty because they were born into poverty. It's just that simple. Yeah. And most people don't switch social classes. They don't. In our country, we like to celebrate the rags to riches story, the person who was doing this. Oh, especially in sports, right? There's a huge population of people in sports, particularly in the African-American community, that came from neighborhoods that were in poverty. And then they have a special skill playing basketball, football, baseball, whatever it is, that somebody gives them an ungodly amount of money to play. And now they've gone from rags to riches. Well, that's not normal, right? So that's not the standard that we shoot people to say, oh yeah, do something to go from rags to riches. No, the reality is most people are born into poverty and they're going to stay in poverty the rest of their life. That doesn't mean they're less than human. It doesn't mean that we don't treat them with dignity. It just means that they don't have a lot of money. That's all it means. Yeah. Because most of them are going to work a service industry job, which is going to give them just enough. They're working poor. Most of the poor are working poor. They're not people who just are sitting around. They work, but they don't have a living wage. So, the wages that they bring doesn't cover the amount of costs that they have, so they just barely make it. That's what most of the people in poverty earn in America. So that doesn't mean that they're less than human.
Yeah. What advice would you give listeners on practicing dignity first service?
Well, the golden rule, treat people like you want to be treated, right? Regardless of their race or their social class or their gender or whatever it may be. Just treat people with honor and respect. Don't see them as objects. Don't see them as something to manipulate. See them as a fellow human being. Have empathy for them for whatever plight they may be in or they may have. And because people who we have empathy for, people who we understand their differences and we act on the commonalities, those are the people who we show dignity to. So why not do that for everyone that we cross their paths?
In our previous discussion, you've mentioned that sports serve as a microcosm for life, teaching lessons in perseverance, teamwork, and handling adversity. Can you share, Alvin, a personal experience where sports taught you a significant life lesson?
Yes. So sports has played a big role in my life. Growing up, I played football, basketball, baseball, and then in high school, I zeroed in on basketball, and then in college, Bible college, I played basketball, coached basketball. Mm-hmm. So I will say, though, that basketball was not something that came natural to me. And in fact, in ninth grade, I didn't make any of the teams. So my high school had varsity team, which was the top level players. It had junior varsity team, which were the next level players, and it had a freshman team. And I didn't make any of them. I did not make any of the teams. So in fact, I'll never forget. I was in the hallway and I was at a water fountain and I was getting a drink, and there were some guys who were down the hall, and they didn't know that I was within earshot. And as I was getting a drink, they said to me, "Man, hope he doesn't make the team." I remember that. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that type of stuff is fuel for me. Some people hear stuff like that and they're like, oh, I feel bad. I'm like, oh, I'm going to show you, right? So I immediately, after not making the team, spent that year working hard on my skill set, worked on my skills, went to basketball camp at a local college to even get better, did all of the things necessary to get better, and then God intervened because from 9th grade to 10th grade, I went from 5'10" to 6'4". So I grew. And I'll never forget the first day of school of my 10th grade year, the coach saw me in the hallway. He said, "Alvin, you grew." Not "Hi, Alvin," not anything like that. He's like, "Hi, Alvin, you grew." So 10th grade, I grew another inch. I'm 6'5", and so 10th grade, I made the junior varsity team. 11th to 12th grade year, I played on the varsity team and had a wonderful experience. So I guess the whole lesson is if you have a goal, if you have a vision, don't let people stop you from achieving that. Put in your best effort, and usually if you put in your best effort, you'll achieve what you want to achieve in life.
Yeah, great. You've highlighted the power of sports to unite communities and bring out the best of humanity. Yes. Can you give us an example where you've witnessed or facilitated this unifying power in action?
Yes, let's go back to what we were talking about in terms of the Chiefs, right? Because World Impact has a lot of staff from Kansas. Okay. So when the Chiefs win and the Chiefs play, it's a pretty big deal. All right. In fact, one of my team members, Sarah, she talked about when she went to church on Sunday, she got up to make an announcement and she looked out and she chuckled because when she looked at the congregation, 90% of the congregation had on the Chiefs colors ready for the game, right? The game's not, church is in the morning. The game wasn't until 6 o'clock.
Wow.
But, sports is one of the few things that can mobilize an entire city, right? Because everybody puts the colors on, everybody's having parties, everybody's talking about it, everybody was working to do their part to make sure in the hope that their team does well. So I would say, one of the things that sports does is it brings people together, people who you wouldn't think would be in the same room. But man, you start talking sports, oh wow, that's a glue that brings a lot of people together.
Yeah. I think sports is within communities. It's like a social virus, and there is no antidote.
I like that social virus with no antidote. I love that. I'm gonna steal that.
Because what you describe from the get-go in the morning, people are already in the mood. It gives them this kind of boost in terms of motivation.
Yes.
They are there together, talking, gossiping, predicting,
yes.
arguing sometimes, and depend on which sport. In soccer, it's a bit different because in other sports, even when a team lose a game, there is no that, correct me if I'm wrong, Alvin, I don't see a kind of aggressivity within the fan base and within the community in baseball, basketball, football, American football, but in soccer it's quite different, which is a shame. And in what ways can communities leverage sports to foster inclusivity and collective growth, in your opinion?
Well, I think sports can be leveraged as a key bridge builder because it will bring people together that won't normally come together, but they will come together around sports. So I think organizations or people can utilize sports as a way, sort of as a icebreaker or a way to build relationships because you gather around the sport whether it's your kid's soccer team or a football team or whatever it may be, right? But as you said earlier, you end up talking about many things that have nothing to do with the sport, right? You just get to know the person as an individual, and you talk politics, or you talk this, or you talk religion, or you talk whatever it may be. And you end up talking about a lot of things, and you get to know people, but you would have never known them if you didn't have that sport in common, right? So I played sports all my life, like I said earlier, and there are many people who I met who I never would have met if it wasn't for me playing on that football or baseball team or that basketball team. Some people I'm friends to them this day, 3-4 decades later, because we played on the same basketball team, right? And they're doing what they're doing, and I'm doing what I'm doing. But the thing that brought us together from day one was we played the same sport. We went through the same struggles. We ran the same sprints. We got yelled at by the same coach, right? So we had all this commonality that was built up starting with sports that helped us to understand our differences and be able to relate to each other.
Yeah. Let's go back and talk about redemptive poverty work. How do you encourage organizations to embrace redemptive actions?
The first thing is it's a relatively new concept and new term. I'm sure other people have this concept, but they just call it something else, right? It's very similar. So I'm not by any means saying that this concept is original to me. I'm just saying that that's the way I label it. And so the redemptive way of Christ is, again, it's creative restoration through sacrifice in our lives and work. So it's, okay, that's the overarching concept. So how do we apply that to whatever it may be that we're doing? So if I'm in charge of a business, if I have that mindset, how does my business change? Right? If I coach a team, if I have that mindset, how does that change? So that's sort of like the rubric. Obviously I would say that the best place that you would learn about what it means to live a redemptive life is the life of Christ. So if you're open to it, you open your Bible and you can take your pick. You can read the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or I recommend John. For people who aren't familiar with the Bible, read the book of John, because that gives a pretty descriptor of what it looks like to live a life redemptively. So then you look at that and you say, okay, how can I take the lessons of the life that Jesus lived, of creative restoration through life, sacrifice, and work, and how do I apply that to my life as a mindset as I go through it?
Yeah. Let's talk about faith. Why do you think modern society often struggles with maintaining a connection to faith?
I think that we're too smart for our own selves. Throughout humanity, human beings have always believed in something outside of themselves. They always have, from day one. And then there became a period, the invention of science, right? Which I believe, it's been a long time since I've had a history class, so no one kill me.
Okay.
But I believe that the scientific method and all that came in vogue during the Enlightenment. I want to say, from one of my classes. It's in my brain somewhere. So once that came into existence, then it's like, well, there's really no need for faith. There's really no need for understanding the supernatural or whatever it may be, because we can explain it all ourselves by just natural science.
Okay.
So I believe that, with that, even though I would argue that you have to have faith to believe in science, but that's probably another podcast.
Yes,
but
indeed.
Because there's nothing objective about science, and again, but I won't get into all that. But if we say that, okay, well, science is the objective way in which we view life, well, then I don't have a need for faith. But see, the thing that faith does is it gives us our meaning for life. People don't do things just for rationality or just because it's a materialistic thing to do, right? So, for instance, I have a wife, Carolyn, for over 30 years, right? That gives me an intrinsic value outside of tangible materialistic things. I'm not married to my wife, Carolyn, because, oh man, I'm glad she didn't hear this. It's the rational thing to do. I'm not married to her because she brings me some materialistic gain. It's this sort of ontological faith, the same space that faith belongs. It gives meaning to my life to be married to her, right?
Yeah.
And that's what faith does. Faith gives me the meaning to my life. So much more for me that I said I want to pick a vocation that cultivates others' faith, right? So if from a Christian perspective, if I'm a businessman, I own my own business, right? That may or may not give me meaning to my life. My faith gives me my meaning, and I happen to express that faith through a business, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Right. Yeah. So I believe that's the power of faith. I think it's drastically missing in our society because if we don't think that people have any meaning, well, then I can treat you any way I want to treat you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you don't matter. You have no value.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that's a dangerous space to be.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about your reference to science and faith. And as you said, we can talk about this topic for 4 days. Yeah.
Yes.
But for me, science is a process, not a doctrine. Science is based on scientific methods, the data to uncover the truth or validate a hypothesis, or try to solve a problem. And I strongly believe at some point, maybe still today, still now, science has always collided with faith, all the time.
Yes.
But when we look at the past, some of the scientific breakthrough, if we should call them scientific breakthrough, the discovery of medicine, the discovery, for example, of mapping, compass, there is so many things. And those scientists, when it comes to faith, either they were Christians or Muslims or whatever, they had both. But somehow, I think within the time, probably from the Industrial Revolution, science started to collide with faith for whatever reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe science took the place of faith.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. And it was never meant to be that way.
Yeah.
Because God has put truth in the earth, I believe, right? And wherever if the scientific method brings you to a certain truth, that doesn't collide with the Christian faith, right? I think Christians make the mistake of trying to make the Bible a scientific book. It's not a scientific book. It's a book of faith. Now, there are things you can read in the Bible, and you say, oh, that matches up with what we know about medicine. It's like, okay, great, but that doesn't make it a scientific book. No. And the two aren't diametrically opposed. But for whatever reason, there became this divorce of, well, we don't need faith anymore. We don't need it anymore because we have this scientific method. And I think that's just a drastic mistake.
Yes, it is. It is. Can you share a personal story where faith provided guidance or strength in a difficult situation?
Yeah. I mean, which one you want to know? But
pick one.
I think, yeah. Well, I'll speak to a recent one. I have an aunt. Her name is Lemurl. It's a combination of different things and different people from my family. But she was a very godly woman with a very godly life. She's in her, I believe Aunt Lemurl is in her early 80s. She has been in hospice care since last summer. So August of 2023, the doctors came to me and they said, I'm her power of attorney and I take care of her affairs. And they said, well, Alvin, she's going to die in a month.
Oh.
This was August of 2023. She's going to die September 2023. Make sure you start getting her affairs in order. Well, it's January 28th, 2025. And she's still here. And she's in hospice. And she doesn't recognize anybody. And she barely eats. And she's sleeping most of the day. She's lived a full life. Her husband has passed. Her only child has passed. And I'm like, God, I don't understand why she's still here. I don't understand what is going on, what your motive is, what is happening, because I believe at the end of the day, it is God who decides and numbers our days. So the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, right? It's muddy and it's murky. So I have no idea why my Aunt Lamoral, who I love dearly, is still with us, right? I don't know. And I don't believe in taking things in my own hands and ending her life. So I'm not going to do that. But it is my faith in God that God, regardless of my understanding of what's going on or the circumstances around, that you have everybody's best interest in mind. And I'm going to trust you, because ultimately that's what faith is. I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to trust my Aunt Lamoral's life in that for whatever reason you have her around. That makes sense to me from a human perspective. But from a life and dignity perspective, I'm going to make sure she's cared for as best as she could possibly be cared for during this time, even though she doesn't even recognize who I am or anybody else, and she's withering away and all these other things. But God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to have faith in you that you have her best interest in mind, my best interest in mind, the world's best interest in mind. So I would say that's my present ongoing thing of me displaying faith.
Thank you for sharing, Alvin. And it's definitely not science.
Yeah. No. Science can't help me with this.
No. No. How do you help others discover purpose through their faith?
I think that I help people understand that there's something bigger than themselves. That's the biggest challenge and barrier to faith. That there's something bigger than themselves. Is there's something bigger than this world. And I try to help people. I'm very big on not making decisions for people, but I'm big on inquiry. Like if there was somebody who was curious about my faith, I tell them about my faith, and I tell them about how I view God and how I see things. And it gives them their own space to make their own decision upon what it is they think about faith. Mm-hmm. So I try not to indoctrinate people, so to speak. Like I'm not going to argue with you. I have a saying that I say, if you don't like what I'm selling, put your wallet back in your pocket. Right? It's all good. But if you ask me, all right, I'm going to tell you a particular viewpoint. Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell you why I have that particular viewpoint. I'm going to invite you to explore that particular viewpoint, and then make your own decision upon whether or not you think faith is important to you as a person or individual.
Yeah. How do you see urban ministry evolving over the next decade?
Oh man, that's a great question. I believe the biggest challenge of urban ministry is the complexity of the urban environment and how to make the church relevant to that complexity. There's a whole lot of questions and issues that society has in terms of morals and in terms of ethics. The church cannot allow the complexity of an issue, or frankly, the easy way out, to hijack the mission of Jesus Christ. So for instance, a big thing that we're dealing with in the United States is something called Christian nationalism. And Christian nationalism is this unholy alliance between church and state. So, for instance, there are people who would say that America should not be a secularized state. It should be a Christian place, so that the politicians, regardless of whoever's elected, well, no, that's not true. Certain politicians, if they're elected, are seen as God's people, regardless of what they display with their lives and their hearts and the teachings of the scripture. But because they have access to state power, right? That's God's doing. And so they marry Christian beliefs with certain political beliefs, and hence you have Christian nationalism. And that plays itself out in the policies and the practices and the procedures that cities operate under. And that makes people's lives either harder to live or better to live. And the church always has to pick a side, particularly the urban church, always has to pick the side of the poor and the oppressed. Yeah. If there's a group that the state is oppressing, the church, regardless of the political persuasion of the oppressor, has to pick the side of those who are feeling the oppression. And that's a challenge. That's a major challenge today in urban communities, because it may alienate you from power and it may alienate you from resources. And so you have to make a choice as to how you're going. Are you going to follow the scriptures? Are you going to follow the way of Jesus? Are you going to be redemptive towards those, regardless of what the state does? That's probably one of the biggest questions of urban ministry in our time.
When you look back, what legacy do you hope to leave behind?
Oh, wow, man, that's a super deep question. You should have gave me that one a week beforehand. What legacy? I think the biggest legacy, I always want to leave a person's life or a neighborhood or a community or an organization better off than when I first engaged it. So if I've made your life better, if I'd like to believe the planting, and when I started River of Life Church, Over the Rhine is a better neighborhood because River of Life Church is there. I'm in the World Impact. I just turned 55. If I go to the normal retirement, quote unquote, normal retirement age of 65, I'm like, man, what do I need to be doing in the next 10 years that World Impact is going to be better from when I took over as president in 2017? That's actually a very timely question, because I've actually been thinking about that. What are the things I need to be doing so that the next president comes in and they go, oh, yeah, this is a great place and it's a much better situation. So I guess that's what my legacy to be. I want people to be happy that they knew me, that they were happy that they experienced my leadership, and they say, you know what, I'm better off because I interacted and I knew Alvin Sanders.
Mm-hmm. If you could teach one lesson to be remembered for, what would it be?
One lesson to remember for, what would it be? Make your life count. Make your life count. Give your life to something that is going to make a difference. That's what I always try to teach my kids. I got a 28-year-old and a 24-year-old, and I've always tried to help shape and mold them and say, hey, use the gifts that God has given you to make this world a better place, to make your life count. Don't chase money. Money's important, but don't just pick a profession to chase money. Pick something where you say, you know what? If I do this profession, my life is going to count.
Yeah.
And I would give that advice to everybody.
Thank you. Now it's time for our lightning round.
Okay.
Ready for speedy Q&A?
I am ready.
Let's do this. What's the best book you've read recently?
Spirituality of Fundraising by Henry Nouwen.
Mm-hmm. Favorite sports team of all time?
The Ohio State University Buckeyes, your 2025 national champions.
Morning person or a night owl?
Morning, which is surprising because I switched. I used to be a night owl, but marriage made me a morning person.
There we go.
So.
A song that always gets you energized?
Ooh. That's a lot. There's a lot. I'll go back. I'll go way back to 90s. This group called New Edition. If It Isn't Love. They sing a song called If It Isn't Love by New Edition.
Most memorable sports moment of your life?
Oh, that's super easy. That was last week. Last January 20th, 2025, I attended the Ohio State versus Notre Dame College Football National Championship. I was there in person to see them win the national championship. Nothing will top that.
Great. Favorite meal after a long day?
Pizza.
Any particular pizza?
Or steak.
Oh, okay.
Or steak. Either one. I'll take either one.
You go to productivity hack.
Productivity hack. Do think, and this is why I became a morning person. Start your schedule before everybody else is up. You're when nobody's looking for you to do stuff, you get a lot of things done, buddy. I'll tell you that. That's what I found.
In French, we have this expression: the word belongs to whom starts early or get up early.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. One leadership lesson you've learned the hard way.
It's okay to say I don't know. very okay to say, I don't know. If you don't know, don't try to fake it. Just say, I don't know, and help me understand. Help me figure it out.
I fully agree with you. It is so simple, but yet again, it's so hard for so many people to say, I don't know. And especially now with the digital world, social media and things like that. The minute you talk about topic, everyone is expert.
Oh, yeah, everybody. Didn't we see that with COVID? Everybody all of a sudden had a medical degree. Oh, well, you need to do this. You need to do that. It's like, okay, excuse me, how many medical classes have you taken?
Yeah. It's fascinating. Alvin, if you could have a dinner with a historical figure, who will it be and why?
I know I'm supposed to say Jesus, but I'm not going to say Jesus as a minister. I would say Martin Luther King Jr., because that to me was a man who lived in one of the most difficult, he was just in such a pressure-filled life where he had everything coming out at him. And I would love to have a conversation with him about leadership and how you lead when there's so many things working against you. God, leading against the grain. And it's because it's so funny how his legacy, now everybody accepts him, everybody likes him, and it's been misconstrued of how radical he was when he was leading. And if I could have two people, I'd have Gandhi sitting right next to him because he was the same type of guy leading India to independence against the British Empire, the power of the British Empire. So, man, if I had pizza and steak with those two guys, even though I think Gandhi was a vegetarian, but we'd have to give him something else. But if I have dinner with those two, oh, man.
And if you have to add a third one?
A third one?
In the same
the same dinner?
Same dinner.
I'd probably add Mother Teresa because she had such a heart for compassion in such an unassuming way. So I would add her. I would talk to her. How do you get that heart of empathy and compassion for the least of those, so to speak, in our world? So I'd add them. I'd have a pretty good dinner with those three.
Good. Who has had the greatest influence on your life?
I'd have to say my father. He is, people say there's mama's boys. I was not a mama's boy. My dad. My dad's not perfect. He's still with us. I love my dad. As he calls himself, the original Alvin Sanders, because I'm Alvin E. Sanders Jr. But I have always admired my dad. He has always been my hero, and he's had the biggest influence on me in my life.
God bless. What's one thing people often misunderstand about you?
That I'm a softie at heart.
Okay.
My wife has said I'm a concrete marshmallow. So because I'm so I have a very strong personality, and I lead very forcefully. So people think I'm a hard man or I'm a my way or the highway guy. But the only people who think that are people who don't know me, because people who know me know that I am not that way. I am very collaborative, that I care deeply about people and individuals. And so because I'm an imposing, I'm 6'5", I'm 260 pounds, and I have a very dominant personality, people go, oh, get away from him. Move out the way. Here he comes, right? And I'm really the exact opposite. I'm strong in my leadership, but I'm pretty much, just ask my daughters. I mean, they get anything they want out of me, right? I'm pretty much a softie. So
Fantastic.
Yeah.
What's next in your bucket list?
On my bucket list, I would actually love to make it to Europe
Welcome.
within the next 5 years. A couple hours in Charles de Gaulle Airport. That's it. On my way to Nairobi.
Okay.
But me and my wife would love to tour Europe. See everything. See Rome, see Madrid, see London, see Paris,
Scandinavia.
Well, hey, man,
Sweden.
you pay for it up. You pay for it up there, right? So I could do Norway and Sweden. I could do Stockholm, man.
Summertime.
Get me there.
Summertime is beautiful. Summertime.com.
Yes. But no, me and my wife would love within the next 5 years to spend 2 weeks in Europe.
There we go. Good.
Yep.
And lastly, for our listeners, especially the young ones, if you have to give a piece of advice or wisdom on any topic.
Your young ones, I would say plan your life in 3-year increments. Like if you're in your 20s, in your 30s, well, it depends on what we call young, right? So I'm thinking young, I'm thinking 20s. I'm thinking 20s, probably 30s. Be flexible and plan your life in 3-year increments. Look at what do I want to do for the next 3 years of my life and be flexible. Don't be married to it. Be open to opportunity to explore and expand and learn all you can. Learn all you can because it's going to shape and mold you for the rest of your life. I am what I am at 55 because of my 20s and my 30s. I'd say from 20 to 35. That 15-year period shaped and molded who I am today at 55.
Good. Dr. Alvin Sanders, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And to our listeners, I leave you with this impactful passage from the Bible in verse from Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 to 9. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Thank you for tuning in to the Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our show. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep making a difference. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.